Hello everyone, I'm trying to do this intro as still, I say that as I'm waving my hands around, as still as I possibly can, because as you can see I have big piles of books here, which I will move in a second, but I just thought, I don't know what I thought they would set the scene a little bit, I don't know. Anyway, today's video we're going to be talking through my very limited and mostly unread classics collection. I've done a couple of videos I think where I've mentioned classics and the fact that I don't read them. I think in my anti-TBR video I sort of talked about the fact that I don't read a lot of classics. And there is a shelf on my bookshelf that is dedicated to the various classics that I've picked up over the years, because honestly it's kind of impossible not to pick up a classic here or there, whether you have to read it for school or you just get peer pressured into it by like friends or family or the internet, or you get gifted it by somebody. It is sort of impossible to avoid. And like everyone else, I've sort of struggled with classics because obviously the writing can be quite dense at times and they can be sort of a time commitment, and I don't know, I think I always just felt that, you know, when classics were coming out, they were revolutionary for the time that they came out in, and I always felt like I want to read what's revolutionary in my time now, if that makes sense. Like the books that are going to be classics in 20-30 years, I want to be there now reading those books instead. I don't know if that makes but I guess the older that I've gotten, the more that I've matured, and I guess the more interested that I've got in like the history of literature and like, you know, ancient stories. Like I'm very into Greek mythology and very into Roman mythology and like into the origins of stories, where stories come from, and sort of how they're passed down. I guess classics just come into that a lot, and so I've sort of wanted to repair my relationship with classics, and I guess the best way to do that is to just look at the ones that I already have, and talk about why I have or haven't read them, and hopefully you can recommend me some in the comments, or maybe I have one on my shelf that I haven't got to yet that is like a banger, and you can peer pressure me in the comments to get to it. The other issue I've had with wanting to read and collect classics is that there are so many different publishers that have their editions. For example, like if you want to go and buy a copy of Little Women, there's like a big hardback version, there's like a children's book version, there's like 3 million paperback versions. Like there are just so many reprints all the time, and if you know me at all and you've been on the channel for any amount of time, you will know how pernickety I can get about covers matching, editions matching, things looking nice on my shelf. And I know it's so silly, but if there's ever a classic book that I actually want to read, I panic because I'm like, which edition do I buy it in? Because if I buy it in, say, like the vintage edition, and I want to start collecting vintage classics, what if there's like a specific book that I want to read that vintage don't publish, and then suddenly it's not going to match and it's going to look ugly on my shelf, and I'm vain and I'm shallow and So if you are a classics connoisseur, please tell me how you got around this problem. Did you get around this problem? Is this just an unavoidable problem? Do you have multiple editions of things in different publications? What's the vibe? What's going on? Please tell me. So without further ado, let's just crack on, because I've rambled enough about classics, even though I know nothing about them. So let's talk through what I have in front of me, and it's just going to be very rapid fire because a lot of these I haven't read. And to prove my point, this is incredibly dusty. Wow, iconic. So like most people on BookTube, I have accumulated several of the Penguin Little Black Classics, and then the Mint Classics, which I believe are like the modern classics, and then the black ones are like older texts. These are really cheap and cheerful, so whenever I was in the bookshop it's always very tempting just to pick up one or two because they are very cheap and they look stunning together, and I just have a very collector's mentality where if I have a few I would like some more, please. But unfortunately I haven't read them. Any of them, literally any of them. So we've got The Robber Bridegroom by the Brothers Grimm. Love the Brothers Grimm. We have O Frabjous Day by Lewis Carroll, which is, I guess, an extract from Alice in Wonderland, potentially. And then we have A Nervous Breakdown by Anton Chekhov. And we have Circe and the Cyclops by Homer. We have The Fall of Icarus by Ovid. You know I'm a whore for my Greek myths. We have The Night is Darkening Round Me by Emily Bronte. We have Aphorisms on Love and Hate by Friedrich Nietzsche. I cannot say his name without thinking of the History Boys. If you know, you know. We have Daphnis and Chloe by Longus. We have Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast by Oscar Wilde. I don't know why I'm showing you, they all look exactly the same. We have Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti. And we have Matilda by Mary Shelley. And then in the Penguin modern ones, which are the mint green ones, so they're more recent texts, we have Food by Gertrude Stein, Lance by Vladimir Nabokov, and I actually think I have read this one because I was coming to the end of the year and I needed something to pad out my Goodreads challenge, so I think I have read this one. And then we have The Missing Girl by Shirley Jackson, and we have The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House by Audre Lorde. So yeah, I haven't read any of those, and there's literally no excuse because they're so tiny and short, and I actually want to make a concerted effort this year to get through some of them. I might do a reading vlog at some point to try and breeze through a few of them, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, and I can definitely do that. The next one is a very recent purchase, and it's this stunning edition of Emma that I have shown in like 1 or 2 videos, I think just one. And it's this beautiful like laser cut gorgeous edition by Thomas Nelson, and there's only 10,000 of these published, and they have her other ones, and annoyingly the Pride and Prejudice one is like not available, so I'm like, that's the one that everyone says is good and I want to read it, but we move, it's fine. That's what I mean about like starting to collect and then you realise that you can't get the matching ones and it's gonna just ruin my plans. Upsetting. But anyway, out of all the Jane Austen books that there are that I know of, this is the one that I think will most appeal to me, so it's the one that I would like to start with, but we will see. Speaking of Janes, we have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte and Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte in these sort of weird hardback editions, which I've also shown in other videos again, but I don't know what this publisher is, I don't know where I got these. I don't think I can get any other classics that look like this, so like, what was the point? I might just have to rebuy these 2 titles in another edition. It's annoying. Also, I've just realised that with the humidity in my room right now, I do look a little bit like an Afghan hound, but that's fine, we move. So let's move on to this little stack, which I'm sure you know the red is the iconic vintage, and then I can't even see if you can see on the thumbnail. The black is the Penguin Classics, I think. We'll see. Okay, so we have Penguin Classics, which are the black ones, and of those I have Man and Superman by Bernard Shaw. Bernard Shaw. Or is it George Bernard Shaw or just Bernard Shaw? What is your name? Bernard Shaw, whatever. And whatever. The reason I bought that was because I saw the play adaptation at the National Theatre, which was starring Ralph Fiennes, I believe, and it was very good, so I bought the book and never read it because I'm dumb. And then we have Hard Times by Charles Dickens, which I never read, and I don't know why I bought it. I think potentially because we did Great Expectations at school, and they told us that like maybe reading Hard Times would be like a good contextual reference to like put Great Expectations in context of his other work. And I never read it, but it's fine. And then we have, as I said, Great Expectations, which I bought because we studied it at school at GCSE level, I believe. I got good marks, so no, not GCSE, I think it was AS. And then we have Candide or Optimism by Voltaire, which I didn't read. And I think this was for, we had this class at school called Matrix of Knowledge, or like Theory of Knowledge, or whatever. I think it was Matrix of Knowledge, where it was basically like you could just take a class that you wouldn't get examined on, and it was about like bits of history and like philosophy and stuff that you don't learn in your other classes. A bit like what they used to call general studies. Again, if you've seen the History Boys, which is coming up again, it's kind of what they do in that. It's just like classes to make you interested in the world and ask questions and all of this stuff. And as part of that, we were supposed to read this, and I didn't because I'm a bad student apparently, so. And then moving on to the Penguin Modern Classics, which have these like white spines, and I think there's also ones of these that have mint spines, so I don't know what the difference is. If that's the old ones and these are the modern ones, then what's the mint ones for? I don't know. Anyway, of the modern ones we have The Ballad of the Sad Cafe by Carson McCullers, and I think I bought this because my mum liked it and recommended it, and I never read it. I think I might have started it with her when I was younger and just never got very far. Next we have a portrait of the artist as a young man by James Joyce. I don't know why I thought James Joyce was going to get on well with me. I think, again, this was English A-level and there was like a selection of books that we could select for an essay, and I was meant to read all of them and then pick what I wanted to do, but I knew before reading all of them what I wanted to do, and it wasn't this, so I didn't read it. And that brings me nicely on to Lolita, which I knew that I wanted to do for my English essay thing, so I chose this, which actually wasn't part of the selection that they gave us. I just asked if I could do it because I thought it would be relevant to what we were doing and I wanted to read it, and I did. And this is filled with highlights, which I never usually do in my books, but because I was studying it, it has a lot of highlights on like the growth parts, so yeah. And then moving on to my, I was going to say vintage, but actually there's one rogue penguin in there which has a red spine, and this is an edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, but it's one of those special ones where you can like design the cover yourself, so it comes like just a blank cover and you can just draw on it as you wish. And this was gifted to me by my friend Lizzie at school, and it's very nice, and I haven't read it. But she gifted it to me because we performed Dracula at school, and I was in the play of it, so I should probably read it at some point. And then moving on to the iconic red vintage spines, and so these are obviously my vintage paperbacks. They're all a bit battered though, I'm kind of bummed about that, but anyway. We have To Kill a Mockingbird, obviously by Harper Lee, and I don't know why this is so beat up. I think maybe it was my mum's before me, and she gave it to me when I studied it at school, so I don't know why it's so beat up, but... I then have What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver, and this again was owned by my parents, and I stole it because it is referenced in the movie Stuck in Love, which I was obsessed with as a teen, and I wanted to read the collection that they mention a lot in it. This is a short story collection about love, and it's also mentioned a lot in the film Birdman, because they're performing a play version of this book, so culturally relevant it feels like, and I never read it fully, so I want to read this very soon. We then have Picnic at Hanging Rock, and this for some reason is like shiny. All of the other vintage things that I own have matte covers, and this one is shiny for some reason. Again, why? This perplexes me. But anyway, I have actually read this one. I read Picnic at Hanging Rock because I wanted to read it with B, and I want to watch the film. That's something else that's long overdue on my list. But this is just very beautiful, ethereal, gorgeous, stunning vibes. If you don't know, it's about these 3 or 4 girls who go off into the Australian desert for lunch and then they disappear off into the rocks, never to be seen again, and it's basically about the effect that their disappearance has on their remaining girls at the school and the sort of hysteria that ensues after they disappear. And then my last vintage classic is a little bit of a sentimental one because it is my favourite book of all time, or one of, but I think it potentially might be my favourite book of all time, which is so dumb. Like, why don't I read classics when my favourite book of all time is deemed a classic? And it's The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories by Miss Angela Carter, and I go on about this all the time. Again, why haven't I read Angela Carter's Other Stories? A good point, a good question. But this again is like a very sentimental copy because I don't know if you can see that it's just highlighted to the nines, but this is the one that I studied in school and it's the one that I read for the first time, so it's a little bit beat up and obviously covered in highlights, but has a very soft place in my heart and I love it with every fibre of my being. But that's another thing, right? Because in my TBR pile, which I was not gonna battle for this video, I have several more Angela Carter books I want to read, and a lot of them are in vintage with the red spines, but then for some reason The Magic Toy Shop is published by Virago and it has a bright green spine. And I'm like, why is just that book published by Virago? Because if I want to own every single Angela Carter book, they will not look the same. I'm upset. And then randomly we have 2 Wordsworth Classics, and I don't know why, because I'm sure both of these texts are published in Vintage and Penguin, so I don't know why I have the Wordsworth Classics editions, but we move. Anyway, so there's Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. This was gifted to me by my French teacher at the end of AS level French. She gifted us all a copy of Madame Bovary because it's French, and she was a very good teacher despite the fact that French regularly made me cry. She really put up with a lot, so thank you, Mrs. Pfeiffer. I will read this for you some point soon. And the other Wordsworth classic that I have is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and this is a story that I love, and I know it very well because I've seen various films and iterations of it over the years, but I never read the book, which is criminal because it's so tiny. I also never had to study it for school, which I know a lot of people did, so it just is a gap in my sort of, I was going to say it's a gap in my classics knowledge, but honestly my whole entire classics knowledge is just a big massive gap, so. And we now move on to the sort of modern classics that I have. So a lot of these are published by people that are still alive or have only very recently passed, so they're like more contemporary writers, but they're deemed as like modern classics. So the first one we have is published by Faber, and it's The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, obviously a very famous text, and I have read this one. I love this book. Very harrowing, but very just haunting in lots of different ways, and I very much recommend it if you feel like you're emotionally in the right place to read it. I then have 2 Ian McEwan novels, and I don't know if this counts as classic because obviously he's still around and writing stuff, but they're published by Vintage, and in my head anything that's published by Vintage is a classic, which is probably not correct, but anyway, I don't know if these count, but I have Enduring Love and Onchester Beach. Again, these do not look vaguely similar or by the same author at all. And I know this is Ian McEwan's usual style, and a lot of his other books are published in this sort of photographic way with the white border. This is not. It upsets me. But I studied Enduring Love at school, which is why I have this, and it was interesting. Yeah. Our teacher did say that, like, it wasn't one of her favourite books to read, but it's a very good one to study because there was just so much packed into a very short space of time. So do with that what you will. And then I read Onchester Beach because I'll deal with that in a minute. And I read Onchester Beach because I wanted to watch the film with Saoirse Ronan, and then I never watched the film. I read the book though, so I guess that's a win because I haven't read a lot of these, which are now digging a hole into my thigh, but anyway, just gonna put that there. We then have The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks, which I'm not sure if it's a classic, but it's published by Abacus, and I know that Ian Banks is no longer with us, but is an iconic author, so I'm including it here. I love The Wasp Factory. It is chilling, memorable, it has a big old shock in it, and it's done very well, and I read this again for school because it was one of the contenders of something that we could write an essay about, but I chose other books, but very much enjoyed this and do recommend. We then have The Only Story by Julian Barnes. Again, he's a contemporary living author but published by Vintage, and therefore it's a classic in my mind, and I actually have read this one and I enjoyed it. It is about a relationship between a man and a woman. I think there's a quite significant age gap between them, and they meet at like this country tennis club, and it's about how their relationship evolves over the years. Don't remember that much about it, but I think I gave it a good review, so. And the last one we have is by Virago, and it's part of the Virago Modern Classics, and that is Heartburn by Nora Ephron. And Nora Ephron is probably best known as a filmmaker. She wrote and directed When Harry Met Sally, and also You've Got Mail. So those are those iconic New York rom-coms that are very sort of funny, very warm, and that style carries over into Heartburn, which is a sort of memoir, sort of fiction. Basically her husband left her, I think, quite publicly and quite embarrassingly. I think he went for a much younger woman, and then she wrote this fictional story about a woman who gets cheated on and left by her husband, and it's funny and sad and melancholy, and it probably says a lot about love and marriage, but as I have not been married and I don't know if I have much interest in being married, it maybe didn't do as much for me as it would for other readers, but it is something that I think I can see myself coming back to when I'm older and maybe more like learned in, you know, life and whatever. So there you have it. Those are all of the classics that I own. Like I said in the beginning of the video, most of them I haven't read, so if there are any that I've mentioned that you think are like 10 out of 10 amazing books, bully me to get to them in the comments. And if you have any advice on like which publications to go for, how you combat the sort of everything's in different editions and nothing is gonna match, and how do I start collecting because everyone publishes these books and it's kind of overwhelming. If you have any advice about that, leave that in the comments also. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Bye. And now I have to clean this up, but bye.